What if the key to leading great teams wasn't a framework, a roadmap, or a title, but the mindset that you bring to the table? In this episode, Bruce McCarthy takes us from childhood Lego worlds to boardrooms inside some of the world's biggest organisations, revealing how creativity, curiosity and culture shape everything we build. He talks openly about the shocks, the setbacks and the moments that forced him to rethink what leadership really means. From running a business within a business, to navigating misaligned teams, to discovering why mandates never create change, Bruce shows today the human side of product leadership and the lessons that apply far beyond tech. If you lead people, shape strategy, or want to build something that actually works, this conversation will shift the way you think.
I think my origin story begins with Lego. I just always gravitated to Lego. As a kid, I was the kid who annoyed the crap out of their mother by just always having them everywhere. I also attracted a mate by building things with Lego. Being an entrepreneur is great training for being a product person. I did every last thing. I did the marketing plan, product development. We raised a couple $1 million and we're not able to make it a success. It was a huge cultural shock going from 75 people in a software company in Massachusetts up to 10,000 people in a 180-year-old financial services company. No, you have to understand, Bruce, we're not trying to be entrepreneurial here. It was shocking to me that the business model did not involve innovation or creating anything new. I had a boss at ATG who said, Bruce, you're not just the product manager of the code that we ship, which is the machine that delivers value to the customer and makes money in the process. A really successful, advanced, experienced team with OKRs could do maybe 3. If I were you, I would start with 1. And they said, no, we're seasoned executives, it's no problem.
Bruce McCarthy has made a career out of turning messy teams into aligned, outcome-driven machines. He's a product leader, author and founder who's helped shape how modern companies think about building and scaling great products. Known as the face of Boston product management, Bruce has spent decades leading teams at startups and giants alike, from Oracle and ATG to NetProspects and D&B, before founding Product Culture, a consultancy that helps organizations create alignment and focus through outcome-driven product teams. He's the co-author of Product Roadmaps Relaunched and Aligned Stakeholder Management for Product Leaders, books that have become staples for product managers worldwide. Through Product Culture and his Chief Product Officer Forum, Bruce works with clients like Toast, Camunda, Secure, and Johnson & Johnson, helping leaders transform uncertainty into clarity, and strategy into action. He's a serial entrepreneur, a speaker, President Emeritus of the Boston Product Management Association. Bruce brings humor, humility, and hard-earned wisdom to every conversation about leadership, alignment, and the craft of product management. Hats off, Bruce. I'm going to welcome you to the show, but that has to be the hardest bio to read that I've ever created, but I hope it does you justice.
It's fair. I'd say fairly accurate. So why was it hard to read?
There's a few tongue twisters in there. There's a few tongue twisters, but I like it. And we've known each other for a while now, so I'm very honoured I'm over the moon to bring you to the show, because I think I've been trying to go back through connections that I've made over the last 3-4 years, and I think there's some wonderful personalities, you being one of those, that I just want to share with our audience and share a bit of the journey that you've been on to get where you are right now. So we're going to dive into a few things, but I'm going to go back to one of the things that you've said is that you've been making things since childhood. So what drew you to building? How did you kind of develop that creative instinct?
I think my origin story begins with Lego. I don't know why, but I just always gravitated to Lego as a kid, as many kids do, right? But I was the kid who annoyed the crap out of their mother by just always having them everywhere. She's stepping on them. She's trying to clean them up. and it's hopeless because I'm always just going to come back behind her and build something else. I used to build these giant, I called them ponds or lakes. The idea was that there was a shoreline defined by a bunch of random Legos just dropped around the entire family room. And then I would build piers and docks and factories and boats and have all sorts of stuff going on across the lake. And of course, that was a giant mess, but I just enjoyed sort of the building out the whole system of it.
Yep.
Eventually, my mom threw me out, and I did the same thing outside. We had a sandbox in the backyard, and I would build a lake. And the brilliant part about her doing that was I could fill it with water from the hose. And then I could bring out small Lego boats, which would float because Legos are pretty light and they hold air bubbles inside them. And so I could have boats floating on the water. And I just liked building the whole ecosystem, the whole machinery of a marina, of a community around the pond. That carried on for ages. There were a couple of seminal moments where I built stuff. I used to just sort of interpret every new part of the world in terms of 3 dimensions and in terms of something that I could build to internalize it. So we went on vacation to this lake, Sunapee Lake in New Hampshire, most summers when I was a kid. And a few doors down from the cabin that we rented, there was what we called the dinner boat, which was an ordinary boat, but dressed up like a steamboat with the paddle wheel on the back and everything. And it was a restaurant, and you would book your meal, and they would cruise the lake for a couple of hours in the evening. And I just thought it was this giant, gorgeous machine. And so I built a replica in Lego, and we're there at the water. So I made it so it would float and not tip over, and to add a rudder and so on underneath. And I floated it over to the actual dinner boat, and showed it to the captain who ran the restaurant business. And he was all charmed up about it and gave me and my brother, who was with me at the time, free ride on the boat. So so I earned food, through Lego.
Special shout out in today's episode for our charity partners, ADHD Liberty, led by Sarah Templeton, who are part of the fight to prevent the school to prison pipeline for ADHD and neurodiverse individuals. If you'd like to find out more, you can visit them. The show links are in the notes below, and I would encourage you to go along and have a look and educate yourself on their fight. It's an incredibly important cause, and we're super proud to have them as charity partners for the Market Pulse Pros and Pioneers podcast. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your episode.
Later on, when I was a freshman at college, I went to school at UPenn in Philadelphia, and they had these iconic buses that were sleek and missile-like, just really smooth-sided and painted red, white, and blue for Philadelphia for patriotism. And so I built one. I built a SEPTA bus, Southeast Pennsylvania Transportation Authority, and rolled it down the hall in the dorm. And this one girl from a couple of doors down was really impressed at how I had managed to quickly make it completely recognizable from the kit that I had brought from home. And that woman is my wife.
That's amazing.
So I also attracted a mate by building things with Lego.
That's amazing. That is an incredible story. Thank you so much for sharing that. Just as an opener, I love it. I guess, you know, I look at my son now and he plays Minecraft on the computer. He loves Lego, like me, loves Lego, loves building things with his hands, but it's unlimited on there as well, right? Like you don't need to go out and buy more bricks. You've got an unlimited amount to build.
That's right.
He doesn't play the game mode, right? He's not interested in that. He just wants to build hotels and football stadiums.
Love it.
So I guess that's like what you said at the beginning about the lake shore, that building that world is kind of where that all stems from. I love that. And then how did you mentioned you went to college and all the rest of it. So I guess at some point you realized that product was something that you wanted to be more heavily involved in, right?
Well, I didn't really know what it was at first. I I'd had various marketing and sales jobs, and then I did a startup with my father we wanted to market home environmental test kits and services so that you could detect if you had lead paint or asbestos or whatever else in your house. I learned a ton from that. Being an entrepreneur is great training for being a product person. I did every last thing. I did the marketing plan, product development, some software development for the inspectors to walk them through. I did the pro forma books, the business plan. We raised a couple $1 million, and we're not able to make it a success. Like many startups, we failed, but we learned a lot. And my first software product management job came after that. I had never heard of the term product manager, but it sounded kind of like a marketing job to me. And nothing during the interview process convinced me otherwise, because they were mostly asking me questions.
Yep.
And I was reasonably well equipped to answer questions from all different parts of the business because I had essentially run this small startup business. So they hired me. And then I gradually found out what product management really was, learning from my boss, John Wang, who later went on to become the CMO of HTC, the phone maker. He was a genius and taught me a lot about both software product management and the ownership mindset that comes with that, and the growth mindset, and about stakeholder management. I didn't realize how much I was learning. I was just observing him, but it was a transitional moment for me into product management. I fell in love with the role at that little company called iMarket, and have never looked back.
It almost sounds, the way you describe it, almost sounds like being a product manager is almost like running a business within a business. Is that fair?
That's exactly it. John looked at it not as what features should we build, but at how shall we improve our business. And when as the second product manager in the company, I was building second and third products for the company, we were essentially setting up different lines of business, complementary ones, so there's synergy, but that was the idea. The very first product I created, the core product we had was a CD-ROM, this was that long ago, that had marketing data on it. You could buy mailing lists, essentially. And the biggest problem our customers had was the production of sales letters or postcards or brochures or whatever they were going to print and mail from the mailing lists that they got off of the disc. So I created this internet-based virtual letter shop with a partnership with Pitney Bowes, and was that they could just take the data directly and upload it and get it printed into a mailer. I ran headlong into the .com bubble bursting, and the company pulled back from the internet, and we did not pursue that. I think I had enough time with that product to have one customer, but again, I learned a whole lot, and I learned without knowing the classic triad of product management, that something must be feasible, technically viable as a business, and desirable by the customer. I learned that without knowing the framework from John.
It's coming at it from a different perspective, an outside world almost, applying principles from outside of the industry to disrupt the industry as it stands, right?
That's right.
I wonder then, so you've led teams at some, I mean, it's astonishing some of the teams that you've led people at, so like Oracle, ATG, NetProspect. What would you say are the moments that stand out as real turning points in shaping your leadership style or how you led those teams?
There was a series of moments at Dun & Bradstreet that crystallized for me what it was that I had really learned and absorbed and valued in my experience at iMarket that was not universal. I was just absorbing it, and it just seemed natural. And I give credit to John for that. And I give credit to it being a natural fit for my personality also to be analytical and thorough and cross-functional and entrepreneurial all at the same time, and empathetic to the customer problem. All of those things coming together. So that iMarket was eventually bought by Dun & Bradstreet. That's how I came to work there.
Okay.
And I got to say, it was a huge cultural shock going from 75 people in a software company in Massachusetts to 10,000 people in a 180-year-old financial services company based in New Jersey. The atmosphere was completely different. There was many more layers of hierarchy. When we had our first meeting with people at Dun & Bradstreet to kind of introduce us and figure out how we were going to rationalize the product line, the people in the room from D&B, who outnumbered us 2-1, were just meeting each other for the first time, many of them. And that was bizarre to me because, of course, I knew everybody at iMarket. And we had to really work out that everything was pretty reasonable for a while. We were left alone for a while, but there were a few sort of aha moments that clued me in on what the difference was in the culture. The most important one was I had a couple of times at iMarket made product proposals for a new product that we would develop. And not every one, but a couple of them had really turned into multi-million-dollar things. And the process for approving them was pretty simple. I got together with my boss and his boss, and we just talked it over. And if we agreed, then we went forward. And I didn't need to make a giant 70-page business case, but I needed to put together the three things: feasibility, viability, desirability, and some basic idea of what would be necessary, and then we would do it. I did the same thing, just repeated that at Dun & Bradstreet, and I sent it up the chain and tried to get a meeting and couldn't. And a couple of weeks went by and I heard nothing. And finally, I was in a meeting with my boss's boss's boss. And at the end of the meeting, I just asked him, so what happened with this proposal? And he said, oh, that? No, you have to understand, Bruce, we're not trying to be entrepreneurial here. And I was like, oh, okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Because it was shocking to me that the business model did not involve innovation or creating anything new. The business model at the time was make more money on the things we already have, figure out how to sell more of it. So they didn't really want me to do product management. They didn't really want me to try to create more value. They wanted me to try to extract more value by clever marketing, I guess. And that was an important moment. I was gone within 3 months. I went and worked. That was 3 years. 3 years in after the acquisition, I knew that things were different. It just felt different from the start. It wasn't until that moment that I was convinced that this is never going to work. There was another moment too, and I mentioned cross-functional leadership. There was not much of a notion of cross-functional collaboration or cooperation at D&B. Every department was different. When I needed to get some pricing thing approved, I had to go to the pricing czar, and he just wasn't having any of it. And I fought with him for 2 days, and he just was not interested in my approach to pricing whatsoever. Eventually, I escalated it to my boss in my business line, who just told me to ignore him, just wrote a note and said to the pricing guy, we're doing it Bruce's way, forget about it. And I was like, so this is a top-down decision-making kind of organization. That's not how I think about things. There was another time where the sales team, the person in charge of the organization of our division was essentially the chief salesperson. And we were meeting with her, and she was talking about all of the planning they were doing in her team for the next year. And when I say we were meeting with her, it was a half a dozen of us in product management. And we were kind of like, well, product planning is kind of in our job description. Shouldn't we be part of that? And she was completely uninterested. As far as she was concerned, planning was sales planning. And product was like, well, you guys are going to help us execute on the sales plan, right? So there was no notion of cooperation between sales, marketing, product, engineering. Also, they laid off 99% of our engineering staff and outsourced it to offshore at the time. So we had very little capacity to do any of the things that I was used to doing in terms of building new things. So all of these things accumulated, but the crystallizing moment was when they said, we're not trying to be entrepreneurial here. And I'm like, oh, well, that actually kind of sums it up. So I left and I went to ATG, and where we were, I called a real software company. Oh, there's one more story I got to tell you about Dun & Bradstreet. I think there was some understanding that when they had bought the company, they had bought both the product and the team that created the product, at least at some levels within the organization. Because as the product manager for the product, they invited me to join a team that was building a product internally that was similar. Our product was, at that point, an online service where you could define a list of prospects and then download that list. And you could pay for it with a credit card. And they had an initiative internally to build a web-based tool that would allow their own salespeople to define a list, get a price, download it, send it to the customer. And in phase 2 or 3, they eventually were thinking it could be self-serve on the internet. And in the first meeting, they were describing this, and I'm like, that really sounds like something we already built. So I asked for the requirements, and I read them over, and I was like, our system already does 90% of this. There's a couple of details we could just add in a month or two of effort. So I told them this, and they said, oh yeah, but we do not leverage homegrown software. We don't develop software here. We outsource all of that. And I'm like, well, yes, but A, we already built it, so you don't have to build it. And B, you bought a software company, right? And the attitude was, now I stand by my statement. We're gonna use off-the-shelf tools, and we're gonna get somebody to build it. And I'm like, look, I respect building with off-the-shelf things where you can, but we solved some hard, unique problems with custom technology because there was no off-the-shelf solution that was adequate to the task. Like you can get a regular sort of simple database and you can query it, but it might take you minutes or hours to get a count if it's a very complex and very large query. We had created a custom search engine that would get you a count in less than a second, no matter what. And they were just like, nope. I don't want to touch anything custom.
That's just how we do things around here is a dangerous phrase, isn't it, Bruce?
Right. So I left in frustration, went to ATG where nobody was afraid to build something to spec, to what was necessary. It operated much more like I expected, like I had learned at iMarket, but on a larger scale. I was there for 6 years, very happily. Learned a ton, did all sorts of partnerships, acquisitions, business cases, built on-prem products and SaaS products. Really was a fantastic learning experience.
I guess the difference between the two organizations that you've described there boils down to culture, right?
Well, it does. And that was the origin of my company name, Product Culture, was recognizing that there was a cultural difference that was underlying all of these decision differences, all of these process differences and structural differences. Was the underlying thing was a mindset of, I'm not just here to do a job, tick a box, close a ticket. I am here to make a difference. And that requires me to take a cross-functional approach. My boss's boss's boss at D&B was big on leadership. He used that word a lot. But what he meant by leadership, it seems to me in retrospect, was just relentless optimism, was just we're going to hit this number no matter what. And when I or others who thought like me would be like, okay, well, let's make a plan that for things we're going to do that will get us there by adding value to the customer, he was just not listening. I think leadership involves as much listening as talking, maybe more.
Maybe more.
As much empathy as assertiveness. I think it's got to be much more well-rounded and balanced than that.
I think that there's often a disconnect between senior leadership and the mid-level leadership where there's thinking meets doing. And it's hard for those two levels of leadership to interlink properly in a way that's meaningful for the business. And I think that's where a lot of larger businesses and even some startups, to be fair, get lost in their journey that they're going, and we end up either too busy doing things or too busy thinking about things instead of connecting the two together so that we've got a plan that's actionable,
That's
right?
So I was just giving a talk on the role of the chief product officer, and I think the unique role of someone leading product is to connect the dots between vision that we want to achieve and the tactics that we are doing, usually with some kind of coherent strategy. But not just for themselves or for the dev team, but for the entire company, for all the functions. If we're going to achieve that vision, it's going to take a coordinated effort across the company, across sales, marketing, product, engineering, customer support, partnerships, finance, everybody. And often in the early days of a startup, that's the CEO's job. I mean, that's usually the case. But the point at which a CPO really becomes critical is when the company's gotten to a certain level of success and has gotten a little bit too big for the CEO to be in every meeting and every decision, providing that context and connecting those dots for people. CEOs will find themselves spending time with large customers, with the board, with investors, with analysts, and managing the business. But who is every day there reminding everybody about the context and herding the cats? It could, in theory, be any executive, but engineers don't want to do that. Finance doesn't want to do that. Marketing has got their MQLs to get. Sales is busy making the numbers. It's down to product.
The conversation that you're aligning here sounds very similar to one that I often have with customer experience senior leaders, where they're in a very similar position, where except that it's instead of product, it's the customer experience that everybody needs to align on. But again, There's no ownership. There's no customer experience department. It's not one team's workload, and it falls across the shoulders of everyone. But nobody wants the responsibility for it or has the budget to spare to make it happen, right?
There might be a CX department. There might be people in user experience who are thinking that way. There might be people in sort of modern, innovative versions of customer support that worry about the complete customer experience throughout their journey. But even that is an incomplete view, because we not only need to think about what's the ideal customer experience, but we need to think about where we focus our efforts in improving that customer experience that will make us money.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't mean to be crass about it, but we need to make money if we want to stay in business and keep doing that. And that customer experience also needs to be made as good as possible within the bounds of what is technically feasible and can be accomplished technically in a reasonable period of time. So again, it's that checklist of, yes, it's got to meet the customer's need and be the ideal experience for them within the bounds of we can make money and we can do it technically. And that's the product manager's job, is kind of pulling all of those things together and creating what I would call the flywheel of the business and constantly refining it. I had a boss at ATG who said, Bruce, you're not just the product manager of the code that we ship. You are the product manager of what he called the whole product, which is all of it, which is the machine that delivers value to the customer and makes money in the process.
So at what point then? So you've gone on to this business, which sounds like you had a fairly positive experience compared to the previous role that you'd held, and much more aligned with where you wanted to go with things. At what point did you decide you needed to go off and create product culture and go off on your own?
Well, that was a bit of an accident too. I had various product management roles. I had worked my way up to leadership in a VP of product. And what I was seeing was that product managers, the job was becoming more and more common. And yet there was not a lot of help for product managers in doing the job. A lot of them felt like it was a lonely job, and there wasn't much to help guide or support them. One of the big challenges that I saw was that there was no good software for product managers. They wanted a method for intake of ideas, for prioritization, for road mapping, and for communicating the roadmap. And there were a few solutions that had been created like around the turn of the century, and they were old and creaky and expensive and hard to configure and hard to use. And I got a bunch of demos of these products for my own team to see if we might adopt one. And I just hated them all. And so did my team. And so I left my regular job to start a software company to create some software to do this, to help out product managers. But this was way back in 2013, I think. And I was too early. Everybody I talked to in product was excited to try the product. We got a beta together, and nobody kept using it, not because it was difficult or clunky or didn't have the right features, but because the very candid feedback I got from people was, we don't really have a practice or a process that to automate. We need one, but the tool isn't doing it for us, which is the usual case with software. People kind of expect it will fix everything, when in fact it's just support for doing the right things. And they didn't know what the right things were. So what they did ask me for was training or coaching or consulting. And so I started doing that because I'm just following the customer's need. Again, I'm providing something that's feasible, desirable, and viable. They're paying for it. So I started doing a bunch of training and coaching, and I started, and in the meantime, I had already been, to promote my software, been writing a blog and speaking at meetups. And I got there because that's what the market was asking for. That's how it happened. It's grown from there. I ended up writing a couple of books, as you mentioned, based on that practice. C. Todd Lombardo, my co-author on product roadmaps, talked me into writing that first book with him and Evan, because he'd seen what I'd written and spoken about with regard to roadmaps. And actually, I'm really quite proud of that book, because it changed the practice of road mapping in the world. If you asked people back in 2017, what is a roadmap? They would say, well, it's the dates you're going to ship features on. And now if you ask a product manager, what is a roadmap? They will say it is a thematic roadmap. It is a way of talking about the big steps that are going to be required to reach your product vision. And that's the thesis of our book, is that it should be a strategic communications document, not a project plan.
To bring this to life for those out there who aren't involved in the product world, right? Bruce's books are used as textbooks, right? For coursework, for learning, for juniors across.
I'm amazed.
It's amazing.
The book came out in 2017, and our publisher is shifting to print on demand and isn't going to do another full print run of thousands of copies of the book. But it's their most successful product management book. It keeps selling year after year. So they are reformatting it for the print on demand because they can't afford to have it go out of print.
It's amazing. And I love that it's helped you achieve a legacy, which I think is something that a lot of us aim for, but don't necessarily see before it's within our peak, within our prime, right? Like it's almost something
Yeah.
that happens for a lot of people. Their legacy happens after they've gone or once they've retired or whatever. And you're there to see it, the results of your legacy in person. So I can only imagine how satisfying
You're
that
still
is.
making me feel old.
Yeah. So if we go back to the early days when you first started product culture, then I know how hard it is firsthand to shift people's thinking. What was the hardest part of, or how did you solve the problem of convincing senior leaders that there was a challenge that you were there to solve in the first place? Because obviously you've connected with the junior and mid-level teams, but you've still got to convince the stakeholders, right?
Yeah. And increasingly, that's where my business is focused, is on the leadership. And fortunately, the leadership absorbed some of this too through osmosis. Maybe they're hearing it from their teams, or maybe it's been long enough that they were on the teams and now they're in leadership. And they have a sense that, I don't think we're doing this right. Can we talk to somebody who might have the experience that we need and can help us learn? But even then, so I frequently get people reaching out because I've written books and I appear at conferences and so on, and asking for help. They like what I'm saying, but they're not sure how to make the change they need to make inside of their organization. So they are reaching out for help. But I find it's not an overnight process. It isn't just like, okay, here's the formula. This is what you're going to do. Just do it. Because it's a mindset shift, it often requires learning by doing. When I first started doing training, when I first started doing talks, I was kind of I kind of provided people a blizzard of information. I was like, here's all the frameworks, here's all the techniques, here's what you do step by step. Now go off and do it. And then I would find that people would come back with very basic questions, or they would say, we tried that, it didn't work. And then I would ask them a few questions about how they did it. And I'm like, no, you didn't do it right. So instead, what I have found is that making one change at a time and learning from that, some guidance, is much more effective. I'll give you an example. I worked with this company where there were about 20 different engineering teams, and they were all operating as basic Scrum type teams, product manager, tech lead, engineers, etc. And there was this one particular team that was down on themselves in their retrospective at the end of a sprint because they had once again failed to complete all the work that they had taken on for the sprint. And they were at about 50% of completion. And that was kind of their average for the past few sprints. And they were discouraged about it. And I said to them, well, how are you doing your estimates? And they were estimating in hours. And I said, well, have you thought about doing relative estimation? Just like using Fibonacci or t-shirt sizing or something and then calculating your velocity and then figuring out what your actual capacity is in each sprint. And they were curious. So I just spent like 5 or 10 minutes with a few slides that I already had explaining the method. And then we did it. We just sat down and did it right there. It took us like an hour and a half, 2 hours to relative size their backlog. And they, lo and behold, within 3 sprints, they were within 85% of accuracy on what they could get done. And they were euphoric. They were like, we have taken control of our destiny. They were so happy that they bragged about it to all the other teams. And within a month, everybody was doing it. And that's the kind of creating change that I think actually works, is you find one team whose real problem that they are motivated to try to solve, you can help solve. And then that spreads it. Totally different method than, okay, guys, I'm going to do a training and you're all going to have to do this now. This is a mandate from management. And that never works.
No.
That's the sort of, I'll give you another example. I worked with this executive team on OKRs. And in their first go, they had 8 members of the executive team and 7 OKRs for the company as a whole for the quarter. And I told them, 7 is too many.
It's a lot.
A really successful, advanced, experienced team with OKRs could do maybe 3. And if I were you, I would start with 1. And they said, no, we're seasoned executives. It's no problem. We can do this. And instead of arguing with them, I decided to let them learn by experience. Sure enough, they had something like 28% achievement of their OKRs by the end of the quarter. And in our reflection at the end of it, it was pretty clear that it was because of lack of focus, because they had just too many. Also, they were all very siloed. They were like, except for one, each department basically had an OKR. There was a marketing OKR and a sales OKR, et cetera. And they weren't cross-functional, which would drive collaboration across the executive team. So gradually, quarter by quarter, we corrected these things, and gradually they learned how to do this. And they got down to 1 OKR shared across the entire executive team. That drove a great deal more focus, success. The achievement of their numbers was much higher, and critically, collaboration across the executive team instead of infighting, which is why they had, in retrospect, why they really wanted to have so many OKRs was they didn't want to have to cooperate.
It was all their own unique layer of interest, right?
Yeah, the marketing person could say, well, I made my OKR. The fact that sales didn't make theirs is not my problem.
Yeah.
And that's the last thing you want on an executive team. You want cohesion there more than anywhere else.
We used to call them SEPs, somebody else's problem. And it's definitely, again, it's up there with one of the most dangerous phrases in any business is if we've got somebody else's
now,
problem.
The fascinating thing for me was that there was this focus on I've done my job. There was this lack of ownership of the real results that the company needed to have. There was a lack of cross-functional collaboration and leadership. And I had kind of thought, based on the contrast between iMarket, a tiny tech startup, and D&B, a huge old world company, I had kind of thought, well, this is just a difference in the ethos of modern tech companies, right? It's just, that's the cultural difference, tech, non-tech. But this executive team with the siloed mentality, they were a tech company. Every one of them had worked in tech companies before they joined this company. So they should have had the tech company culture, but it isn't guaranteed just because of the industry you're in or have been in. It needs to be created on purpose.
And I think a lot of what you're saying is incredibly easy to extrapolate out to non-tech companies as well, right? Like you can see the parallels between where a lot of businesses struggle and where others who come out of nowhere and do incredibly well because they look at the world from a different perspective. And I guess that's kind of where I want to go next. So you're the head judge at the prestigious new venture competition at Harvard. What stories or kind of founders' stories have stayed with you from that experience that you've been able to learn something else from?
The competition is basically a pitch competition. You pitch your idea for a product, and it's students and non-students, anybody in the community can apply. And there's a panel of judges, and there's just such an enormous range today in who is doing this pitching. Some of it's Harvard students, but lots of it is not. And it's people from all over the world, and some of them, it's just an idea, and they're just saying, it's just slides, basically. I've got this idea, here's what I'm thinking. Some of them, though, have really taken that ownership mindset pretty far, and it's 1 or 3 or a few people who have built a product and gotten it out there and have some traction and are this close to being ready to raise money. Maybe they've even raised some friends and family money already. And I don't know if there's a fundamental insight here other than I've just been impressed with the incredible diversity. These are people, they might all be local to Cambridge, Massachusetts for this moment, but they're from all over the world, and they're from every different background, ethnically, nationality, economically, and industry-wise. It isn't just a bunch of people doing like social media apps.
Yeah.
Every year there's 2 or 3 people who are trying to figure out how to help farmers or herders in disadvantaged countries. People who are who you wouldn't even think of as people who could be reached by technology. But there was this one where they had a series of automated texts that they would that you could interact with on a feature phone, because you can get a text on that was targeted at helping small single owner farmers in Africa get more crop yields from what they were doing. And I was just super incredibly impressed with that.
I think when you bring together such a diverse background, such a unusually connected background without a necessarily a strong theme through the middle of it, it's amazing that the learners, I'd imagine that a lot of those people who attend that, who pitch, also take a lot of insight from the others that are there as well, right? Like it's kind of, everyone's growing together, and to see that variation is it gives you inspiration.
Well, that's right. And actually, this was in part inspiration for the CPO studio that I run now. The studio is basically a get-together for chief product officers or whoever's in charge of product. I don't think titles really matter at a company. And it is that peer interaction, that peer coaching, that comparing. We get together once a month. There'll be a session on Friday, and for an hour, we will deep dive on one member's challenge. They will present with slides and all. Here is my situation. Here's what I'm trying to accomplish. Here are the challenges I'm running into, the things that I've tried that haven't worked. People, what experience do you have that applies to my situation? What should I do? And we workshop it in depth for an hour as the core part of the agenda, in addition to holding people accountable on stuff they've presented at previous times and just giving everybody a chance to provide an update. And everybody universally says that the 2 things that are valuable there is, 1, they get practical suggestions from other people's experience, because nobody has all the experience they could possibly bring to bear on a problem. And 2, they get validation that they're not crazy, that they're not alone in dealing with some of these challenges.
Or maybe right? They are, but everybody else is just as crazy, right?
Just as, right? Everybody's crazy in their own way, but just as, right? And we deal with challenges, everything from, hey, I'm working on a strategy for launching a new product. Could you I'm going to walk you through it, and I need everyone's critique. Poke holes in it. To interpersonal challenges. My CEO is driving me crazy, and I'm going to give it to him with both barrels. Talk me off the ledge. Or I have a lot of difficulty dealing with my CTO. Is it me or is it him? Do I need to escalate this to the CEO?
I think that's incredible. I can see why it's incredibly helpful for lots of different people, and it reminds me very much. There's only one kind of, I wouldn't necessarily describe it as a networking group, but very similar sort of group with a different focus. We're not product people, but we come together with the same ideas. We do it every Monday morning. There's 5 or 6 of us. We're experts in our own fields. None of us are experts in each other's fields, and we all just kind of bounce ideas off each other. Sometimes we're just ranting about life, but other times we're talking about, our sales and marketing problems, our offerings, our services.
Right.
And it's, I think you're right. I think it's about finding your own tribe, right? And I think that's something that runs through your book as well, your second book, right? Like it's about helping align all the different tribes within the business.
Yeah, on a common mission, which can be really hard, as we've discussed. And so a lot of the lessons I learned, both at Dun & Bradstreet, trying to herd the cats, and working with teams, everything from scrum teams up to executive teams all over the world, a lot of techniques that I've learned for getting people together on the mission and on the plan for executing on the mission, made it into that book. because it's the part of doing the job, I would say specifically of product management, except it's really quite universal in business. It's the part of doing the job that nobody really talks about. Everybody talks about the hard skills. Oh, you got to learn how to do this kind of analysis, or you got to adopt these frameworks. And that's all useful. But the stuff that makes that work is the interpersonal stuff. Is can you get somebody who doesn't agree with you to come to some understanding and go along anyway? And that's not easy.
Taking them out for dinner and getting under their skin, right? Understanding them a bit more.
Well, actually, that is in the book, is an in-person, one-on-one, informal kind of discussion. Informal in the sense of not in the office. Maybe it's dinner, maybe it's coffee, whatever. Maybe you go to the gym, but get out of a meeting with an agenda and into, we are two human beings, and we probably have some things in common that we haven't thought about.
Yeah.
And if we can make that kind of personal connection, it just makes the times when we have to cope with disagreeing professionally easier.
Bruce, I could talk to you about this for all afternoon. Like there are loads more questions that I have that I think are relevant, and I think it's incredibly easy to take the learnings from the product world and apply them to almost any business. So I want to thank you very much for being a fantastic guest this afternoon and sharing your insights and knowledge with us. I'll make sure that the links for the books and your website are in the show notes. Is there anything that you'd like to leave our audience with as a last thought?
If you're with me that this is about mindset more than anything else, it's about culture more than anything else. What you said, Paul, about finding your tribe, I think is really important. Maybe there are some folks like that in your current organization. Maybe there aren't. But I want you to make it your personal mission to connect with your tribe. There's probably a meetup that, like Paul's or mine, in your area or online, that aligns with your culture. Find that place. If you're a product person, you can subscribe to my newsletter at productculture.com. And if you're in leadership, you can join the CPO studio. But whoever your tribe is, don't go it alone.
I love that. Thank you very much, Bruce. It's been a pleasure.
Same. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you at home for watching or listening along. And I'll see you next week on Market Pulse Pros and Pioneers. Thanks for joining us for today's show. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to feature on a future show, or you've got some ideas for folks who would make a great guest, please drop us a line. Contact details are in the show notes, and I'd love to hear from you. Your host today was me, Paul Banks, founder at Javelin Content Management. Here at Javelin, we specialise in helping busy business owners just like you to repurpose video content, taking all the stress and tech problems away and turning your long-form video into literally hundreds of pieces of content without breaking the bank. We describe it as getting ideas out of your head into video and out to your socials. If you want to launch your personal brand, become the vendor of choice for your audience, or maximise your sales revenue impact, we'd love to hear from you. Join us next Wednesday for the next episode, and don't forget to subscribe and give us a review. Our podcast is only possible with your continued